My name is Dana Kessler and I'm 2 years old. Last Christmas Eve at noon, I stood in a converted textile mill on the east side of Providence, Rhode Island, watching 280 people settle into the longest dinner table this city had ever seen under one roof. Then the loading door rolled up. My mother walked in first. My sister came in right behind her, phone already raised and recording. And a room full of easy conversation dropped to nothing, table by table, like a wave losing its nerve. 6 years before that afternoon, my family had set my Christmas Eve dinner on a paper plate on the back steps of my mother's house. My mother's exact words, texted to me while I sat outside in the cold, were that I smelled like I'd crawled out of a dumpster, and she wasn't about to explain that to her guests. I ate alone in my car 3 blocks away. Then I drove out of Rhode Island and didn't look back for 6 years. Welcome back to Untold Secret Hub, and subscribe if you're new here. What my mother did next, in that mill, in front of 280 witnesses, is the reason I'm telling you this story. But there's something none of them knew when they walked through that door. It's bigger than the building they were standing in. If you've ever been told you weren't good enough for your own family's table, stay with me. This one's for you. To understand the silence in that mill, you have to go back 6 years, to a town called Millbrook and the smell of ammonia that never quite left my hands. 6 years ago I was 26, renting the upstairs room of a house owned by a widow named Mrs. O'Kafer on Larkspur Street. The room came with a hot plate, a window unit that rattled like a dying engine, and a rent so low I could almost forget how little I made. I worked the early shift at the Millbrook Inn, 4:30 to noon, stripping linens and scrubbing bathtubs. And after that I picked up private houses around town, until the light gave out. The dentist's house, the school principal's house. The kind of houses my mother used to point at through the windshield when I was small, like landmarks on a map she wasn't allowed to visit. My knuckles cracked in every fold. I kept a jar of shea butter salve in my bag, and one good pair of gloves I saved for occasions, and I could tell you exactly which one saw more use. People hear cleaner and picture a mop leaning in a closet. They don't picture the discipline of it. The order you build out of somebody else's chaos, room by room, until a house breathes right again. I was good at it. I loved it, actually, in a way I never explained to anyone, because explaining it felt like handing someone a weapon. And I had a plan, written in blue ballpoint on an index card folded into my wallet, a company with my name on the license one day. Real wages. Real respect. I'd already picked the name, and used to whisper it to myself while I worked, like a private incantation only the grout could hear. That December, the inn was short, staffed for the holiday, and I was pulling doubles, feeding every extra dollar into a mason jar I didn't dare touch. 2 days before Christmas Eve, my phone rang while I was flipping a mattress in room 14. My mother's voice came through the way it always did. Pressed, clipped, a voice that had learned to sound gracious to strangers and never quite unlearned how to sound cold to me. "Dinner's at 2 sharp," she said. "Renee's doing the whole thing properly this year." Then, before hanging up, the line she always saved for last. "Try not to embarrass us." She never said goodbye. Women like my mother don't. They leave you holding the silence instead. You'd have to see my mother's dining room to understand her. I'd stopped by the Sunday before the holiday to drop off 2 jars of her favorite cho relished, because that was always my role in this family. Useful, invisible, gone before dessert. My mother ran her house like a showroom nobody was allowed to actually live in. My sister Renee set a wine glass in the rack. My mother lifted it, held it to the light, and rewashed it without a word. That was the whole relationship, distilled into one damp glass. My mother grew up the daughter of a school custodian in a town 2 counties over, and the other kids at her high school never let her forget it. She told that story like a medal from a war. She was still fighting 30 years later. She'd married my father, Glenn, a soft, spoken man who ran the parts counter at a tractor dealership, and she'd spent 3 decades scrubbing the smell of that childhood off our family name. Renee had married into money. Her husband Marcus ran an event, rental and linen company with his name stitched onto delivery vans. And that made Renee the proof my mother needed. I emptied trash cans at a motor inn. That made me the exhibit she pointed to when she wanted sympathy from the church ladies. That Sunday, Renee was fanning card, stock samples across my mother's counter, announcing that this year's dinner would be elegant. Adults at the main table, cloth napkins, place cards. My mother nodded along and mentioned she'd already ordered the cards, place cards, for a family dinner. My father glanced up from the newspaper, looked at the card stock, and looked back down. That was the entirety of his objection. I remember thinking it was strange, needing place cards for people who all shared a last name. I remember, for exactly 1 second, wondering whose names would be on them. Then I let it go, because letting things go was the oldest chore I owned. I should have counted the cards. Christmas Eve morning, Priya called in sick. Except she didn't call in sick, she called to quit, hanging up her apron at 9:15 and telling me her cousin had a couch in Hartford with her name on it. I don't blame her. But that left me alone with 11 checkout rooms, a full linen change, and no backup. I'd planned that day the way other people plan a wedding. I'd traded shifts for weeks to be free by noon. I had a garment bag in my car with a clean sweater and the good gloves, so I could walk into my mother's house, looking like a daughter instead of a shift worker. Instead, I stripped beds until my forearms burned, and the ammonia smell soaked so deep into my skin I could taste it. At 11 I texted my mother, running behind, coming straight from work. Save me a seat. Delivered instantly. No reply. I told myself she was basting something. By 1:30 I clocked out, still in uniform, hair flattened under a visor line, smelling like a hospital corridor. I had 2 options: drive home to shower and be late, or drive straight there and be almost on time. I believed, foolishly, that my family kept score with clocks and not with appearances. So I chose the clock. I drove across town with the windows cracked in December air, rehearsing my apology at every red light. Priya quit. 11 rooms. You'd have done the same. At 2:40 I turned onto Aldergate Road and saw every car already parked in the driveway. Renee's SUV, my aunt's sedan, my uncle's truck with the dealer plates my father had gotten him at cost. The dining room window glowed warm and gold. A curtain moved once, fast. The way curtains move when someone lets go of them in a hurry. I parked at the curb, grabbed the garment bag out of pure habit, and walked up the path. The storm door was locked. The porch light was already on, at 2:40 in the afternoon, which is its own kind of sentence. I rang the bell and heard it echo through the house. Heard chairs, heard my aunt's laugh, heard silverware, and heard nobody move toward the door. I rang again. Nothing. Then I looked down. On the top step, centered like it had been arranged for a photograph, sat a paper plate wrapped in foil. My name was written across it in thick black marker, all capitals Dannon. Underneath, someone had layered turkey, mashed potatoes, green beans laid in neat parallel lines, and a dinner roll with a pat of butter already stiffening in the cold. Whoever plated that food had taken real care with it. That was the detail that hollowed me out fastest. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother, and I can still see the exact shape of it on the screen. You can eat out there. You're not fit to sit with company tonight. I looked through the gap in the curtains because I couldn't stop myself. The table was dressed in white linen. Renee's little card stock tent standing at every place. I counted the chairs, 7 cards, 7 chairs, 7 people eating warm. On the other side of glass, there had never been an 8th chair. Whatever I was to this family, the table had been telling the truth about it long before the turkey went in the oven. One detail snagged in my mind, though it would take years to matter. The handwriting on the foil wasn't my mother's. She writes in a tight, slanted cursive, sharp as wire. This hand was round, careful, unhurried, with a long looping tail on the D. It wasn't hers. I was too busy breaking apart to wonder whose it was. I picked up the plate, walked back to my car, and drove 3 blocks to the end of the street, where I parked under a bare oak, because I didn't trust myself behind the wheel, and didn't want them watching me sit there. I peeled back the foil and balanced my Christmas Eve dinner on my knees. The turkey was still warm, which somehow made it worse. A warm meal made by hands that wouldn't open a door. I managed 4 bites. I sat there in my uniform with the engine ticking, doing math nobody should have to do. How many holidays? How many casseroles carried through that door? How many times I'd deep cleaned that house before parties, so my mother could tell her friends she'd been at it all week. A knock on the passenger window nearly sent the green beans onto the dash. It was Mrs. Ferris from 2 houses down, walking her arthritic terrier in a coat a size too warm for the weather. "Honey," she said through the glass, "is that your supper?" I gave her the smile you learn in service work. The one that keeps tips coming and questions away. "Just heading out," I told her. "Big family, small table." She stood there a beat longer than politeness required, looking at the plate, then up at the glowing window. Her face did something I didn't understand until years later. She was memorizing it. I pulled away without looking back. In the rear view, the porch light still burned over an empty step. I didn't know it yet, but I was driving toward the rest of my life. The plate came with me. It never left. For 3 days my phone stayed silent, which told me everything about how the rest of that dinner had gone. Nobody called to ask where I'd gone. Nobody called at all. Sunday night, sitting on my bed above Mrs. O'Kafer's kitchen with the window unit rattling, I typed out the longest message of my life. 2 full screens about the double shift, about Priya quitting, about the garment bag still hanging in my car, about what it does to a person to read her own name, written in careful capitals on a plate, meant to keep her outside. I read it back twice. Then, I deleted the whole thing, because explaining yourself to people who lock the door is just knocking with extra steps. I typed 1 line instead. Message received. I won't bother anyone's table again. I sent it to my mother, then started blocking numbers one by one. My mother Renee. The aunt with the sedan. Cousins who'd sat at those 7 place cards, and passed the gravy without a glance toward the porch. My thumb hovered over my father's name when my phone rang, and startled me half out of my skin. It was Priya. My cousin Priya. Not the coworker. The only one who'd ever sat with me, at the kids' table long after we'd both aged out of it. She didn't apologize. She said something stranger. "Dana, there's something in the family group chat you're going to need to see someday. Not tonight. You're not ready tonight. But when you are, I'll have it." I asked what it was. She wouldn't say. She told me to keep her number unblocked, and to go build a life so big I'd forget the porch ever existed. I kept her number. I left my father's unblocked too, though I couldn't have told you why. Then I turned the phone face down, pulled the mason jar out of the closet, and counted. $2,040. That's what 2 years of tips and a return security deposit adds up to. That's what I moved to Providence with. The week after Christmas, I rented a room in a house full of nursing students, took a night shift cleaning job at a dental practice off Wickenden Street, and learned a new city by its empty parking lots at 3 a.m. Scrubbing an exam room in the dead of night gives you a lot of time to think. Mostly I thought about my grandmother, Opal, my father's mother, who'd died 2 years before that Christmas, and was the only person in the family who ever looked at my raw hands like they were something to be proud of. She'd raised 5 kids on a diner, cook's wages, and a vegetable garden. Once, when my mother made a comment about my uniform at a Sunday dinner, Opal reached over, turned my palm up like she was reading my fortune, and said, "Working hands are honest hands." She left me her recipe box when she died, and one letter I have never once read aloud to anybody. Those were the only two things from Millbrook I ever wanted back. In Providence? I taped a torn scrap of notebook paper to my bathroom mirror with a single word on it. The name of the company that didn't exist yet. So it would be the first thing I saw every morning, and the last thing I saw at night. And I kept one more thing, and you can judge me for it if you want the paper plate. Washed, dried flat under a stack of textbooks, slid into a manila envelope like a legal document. My roommates thought I was saving a concert ticket. I let them think it. Some people keep photographs of the good days. I kept a paper plate to make sure. I never talked myself into forgetting the bad one. Capria called in January with what she called the official version. The story my mother was serving the relatives along with coffee. In that telling, I'd shown up hours late, refused to come inside, snatched a plate they'd lovingly prepared, and stormed off in a jealous rage over Renee's beautiful table. My mother told it with a catch in her voice at church, at the salon. At every gathering that would hold still long enough. There had been no rage and no begging. Just a locked door and a text I could have framed. But a lie with a head start doesn't need to be good. It just needs an audience that's already decided what to believe. Not one relative called to check the story against the person it was about. It fit exactly what they already thought of me. The moody one. The one who cleaned rooms for a living. And a comfortable lie beats an uncomfortable question at every family table in America. Priya asked if I wanted her to correct the record. I surprised myself with how fast the answer came. No. Let them keep their story. I'll keep the receipts of my own life. She laughed. The kind of laugh you give when something isn't funny, but the alternative is worse. After we hung up, I opened the Notes app where I'd started sketching out my company. And wrote a line at the top that had nothing to do with cleaning products. Build something they can't ignore. I looked at it a long time, then changed it, because spite makes a lousy foundation. The new line read, build something that doesn't need them. 6 years turned out to be exactly long enough. 2-year one was one woman, one borrowed hatchback, and a trunk organized better than most surgical suites. I kept the overnight dental job, and picked up private accounts on the side. A chiropractor's office, an insurance storefront, a tax office that only got messy in April. I undercut no one, I out-detailed everyone. The motor inn had taught me hospital corners. The dental office taught me the real rules. Sterilization protocols. The difference between clean and disinfected. And the paperwork behind both. I spent my grocery money on a facilities certification course and sat in the front row in my work polo, taking notes like the degree students around me were competition. Because they were. My first private client paid me with a check made out to Dana Kessler. Wrong company name. Right amount. I photocopied it before I cashed it, and taped the copy to my mirror beside the scrap of paper with my company's name on it. Proof and a promise, side by side. The turn came on a Tuesday. Dr. Okonkwo Reyes, who owned the dental practice, stayed late one night and watched me break down an exam chair. Base, hoses, the whole apparatus. He asked why I was scrubbing the foot pedal when no patient would ever check it. Patients don't check it. I told him, germs don't care what patients check. Neither do I. He laughed. Then he stopped laughing and looked around the room, like he was seeing it for the first time. You're the only one who's ever done the pedal, he said. The company he'd contracted for years was big, cheap, and sloppy, and he'd been unhappy for 2 years. He didn't offer me anything that night. But he started leaving the radio on for me, and then notes on the front desk, and the notes got longer, until one of them was a question tie. What would you charge to take this whole building yourself? I named a fair number instead of a desperate one, which took every muscle in my body. He said yes before I finished the sentence. Then he said the thing that changed my life more than the money did. Get yourself an LLC and insurance. I'd rather pay a company than a person. And you should be a company. 6 weeks later, I stood in a strip mall print shop holding the first page of Clearline Facilities, LC's operating agreement. My name typed on the signature line, and I carried it to my car like something newborn. In the driver's seat, where nobody could see me, I came apart, big, ugly, grateful, sobbing, forehead against the wheel. The last time I'd sat in a parked car with something that mattered in my lap. It had been a plate of turkey. Same seat. Different cargo. That same week held one more envelope I almost missed. Forwarded mail from a bank. Addressed to me at my old room above the laundromat. I assumed it was a closed account notice and let it ride around on the passenger seat for 3 days before I opened it. It was a past due notice on a second mortgage. My parents' names at the top. My old address in the window. From a contact sheet I'd filled out years earlier. The loan was 90 days behind, and the monthly figure sat there in bold. A number I recognized instantly. Because, for 3 years, that exact amount had left my account on the first of every month, in cash, into my mother's hand. She called it guess money. That fiction let her take it without saying the real sentence out loud. The daughter with the chapped hands is the one keeping the roof on. My father had taken early retirement, the year his back gave out. The second mortgage had come due not long after. And quiet cash from the daughter, with chapped hands, had been holding the walls up the whole time. The payments stopped the week of the porch. Not a strategy. I'd simply left, and nobody called. And money handed to someone who locks you outside is just a donation with no receipt. I sat in my car and waited to feel guilty. What arrived instead was colder and steadier, like tile under bare feet. They'd counted on my back the same way they'd counted their chairs. I filed the envelope in my glove box and sent nothing. By year 3, Clearline was me plus 2. And I picked those 2 the way I wished someone had once picked me. Marisol was a single mother who'd been fired from a national chain for missing a shift when her son had strep. She showed up to her interview with a reference letter from a private client, which told me she understood receipts. Terrence was a 60-year-old veteran who'd ironed his shirt to interview for a job stripping floor wax. I hired them both on the spot. At a wage that made my accountant sigh, because I knew exactly what this work costs a body. I had exactly one rule that had nothing to do with disinfectant, and I laid it down on Marisol's first day. After I caught her eating a sandwich, standing over a utility sink, like she owed someone an apology for taking a break. Nobody eats standing up. Not on my clock. Every Clearline site got a break table with real chairs, and lunch happened sitting down, like people. Marisol thought it was a quirk. Terrence, who'd eaten off a lot of tailgates in his life, understood it immediately, and never once sat before the whole crew was seated. I never explained why. Explaining it would have meant telling them about a porch in Millbrook, and back then I still kept that plate filed away like a classified document. Word travels the way it does. A clinic manager tells a colleague who tells her sister, and one day, I overheard a new client describing us on the phone as the ones who treat cleaners like people. Best marketing line we never wrote. Priya kept a wire open to Millbrook, whether I asked her to or not. Renee and Marcus married under a tent with a string quartet, which Priya described as a wedding built to be photographed, not attended. Marcus's business, Alderman Event Supply, distributed linens and rentals across the region, and Renee had taken over its books and most of its sentences. My name never came up at the wedding. It came up exactly once that whole year, when Priya went quiet mid-call and said, "You should know what your mother says about you." I could guess? I said. "No, it's specific. She tells people you clean toilets in Providence, says it like a warning. Like a bedtime story about what happens to girls who don't fall in line." I folded the towel in my hands and set it on the stack. She's not wrong, I said. I do clean toilets. They're spotless. Priya laughed the way you laugh when it isn't funny, but the alternative is worse. Year 4 nearly ended us. A regional property group that owned 6 clinics, a third of our revenue, started paying at 60 days instead of 30, then 90, then in promises. I had 14 people on payroll by then, and I will skip my own paycheck before anyone on my crew misses an hour of theirs. Which is easy to say until you're actually doing it. The same month rent is due. I sat at my kitchen table one night with a predatory loan agreement the internet swore was standard, pen in hand, already on the signature line, when the phone rang. A Millbrook number I didn't recognize. Every muscle from my neck down turned to rebar. Because unknown Millbrook numbers were always how I imagined the bad news would arrive. News about my father. It wasn't. It was a nurse at Millbrook General, calling on behalf of a Mrs. Ferris, admitted overnight for observation, who had badgered the staff into tracking me down through Priya. Because she had something to say, and had no intention of dying with it unsaid. Though she also had no plans to die, she skipped hello entirely. "You're the girl who ate her supper in the car," she said. "You send me a card every year and sign it like I don't know who it's from. I know exactly who you are, honey. I never forgot what I saw that night. I just wanted you to know somebody saw it." I put the pen down. The next morning I called the property group's operations director and renegotiated like a woman with nothing to apologize for. Net 30. Deposits up front, or we walk with our checklists and our client list. They blinked. We stayed. The loan agreement went through the shredder. And I mailed Mrs. Ferris a card that, for once, I signed with my whole name. The following year I stopped waiting for business to find us. Holloway Medical Group ran 9 locations across the county, and their facilities director, a retired hospital administrator named Pat Ansara, famous for eating vendors alive at renewal, skipped the usual glossy folder pitch and ordered a live walkthrough instead. 1 supervisor per bidder. 1 hour, narrate what you see. I heard later that a competitor spent his hour talking about his fleet of vans. I walked Pat through her own building and showed her what her current vendor was missing. The underside of the reception counter, the sterilization room's door handle, the foot pedal on exam chair 3, a supply closet whose inventory hadn't matched its shelf since spring. At the end she asked one question. "Where did you train?" "Housekeeping?" I said. The answer I'd stopped being ashamed of somewhere around year 2. Millbrook Inn, 6 years. Best infection control program in New England. They just never called it that. She laughed exactly once, like a stapler. We got all 9 buildings. On the drive home I heard, through a friendly rep, that our glossiest competitor had told Holloway's board that our founder was, in his words, a motel maid playing dress up. Pat had reportedly told him she'd take a maid over a salesman in any building where people bleed. I sent her a fruit basket that Christmas. She sent it back with a note: "Spend it on your people." We've renewed 3 times since. The week we signed the lease on Clearline's first real office, a storefront with a warehouse behind it, I finally unpacked the last box that had followed me through 3 apartments. At the bottom, under tax folders, sat the manila envelope. I hadn't opened it in 6 moves. I slid the plate out onto my new desk. It had gone soft at the edges the way paper does, the foil long since discarded, but the marker had only faded, never surrendered. Dana, all capitals, the long looping tail on the D. I took it to a frame shop, and the kid behind the counter treated it like I'd brought in a museum piece, gloves and all, no questions asked. Which is how I learned frame shops must see everything. It went up on the wall behind my desk, and underneath it, on a small brass plaque I paid too much for, 1 line, reserved seating. But here's what actually happened at that frame shop that I never told anyone. Under the good light on the counter glass, for the first time in 6 years, I actually studied the handwriting instead of the wound it represented. The round, careful letters. The long gentle tail on the D. Like the writer couldn't help finishing softly even under pressure. My mother has never written softly in her life. Standing at that counter, I finally let myself ask the question the porch had never let me ask. If she didn't write my name, who did? The long table started by accident. In year 5, on the Wednesday before Christmas, I was walking the warehouse floor at closing and found Malik, our newest hire at 22, signing up for a holiday monitoring shift we barely needed. I asked why. He shrugged. No point sitting in an empty apartment when I could pick up the pay. And there it was. The whole porch. Standing in front of me in a clear line polo. I canceled the shift. Then I went home and couldn't sleep, and by 6 the next morning I'd ordered folding tables. By noon Thursday, the warehouse smelled like turkey and 30 people were eating at one long line of tables pushed end to end. My crew, their kids, Marisol's mother, Terrence in a tie. I stood to say something and managed one sentence before my throat closed. Everyone eats on real plates here, I said. And everyone gets a chair. They thought it was a toast. It was a policy. The next year we fed 110 crew families plus half the neighborhood. Because word travels fast when a cleaning company roasts a dozen turkeys. By year 6 we were planning for 280 seniors from the Wexford Towers, night shift workers, students who couldn't afford the bus fare home, anyone whose holiday had an empty chair where family should have been. We rented real china. I paid the deposit personally and would have paid it twice. One rule, printed on a banner over the door, and by now you could recite it with me. No paper plates. A reporter from the Providence Ledger heard about us that fall and asked to profile the founder. I said yes on one condition. They had to photograph the wall behind my desk. 2. Year 6 was the year Wexford Towers sent 2 buses. 41 residents, some of whom hadn't eaten a holiday meal in company for a decade. I stood at the loading dock greeting coats and canes. And halfway down the second bus, gripping the rail like royalty descending, came a face from another life. Mrs. Ferris had moved into the towers after her husband passed. And when she reached the bottom step, she looked at me for a long, terrible second in front of everyone. You, she said. The girl with the dinner in the car. Yes, ma'am, I said. She handed me her cane. Took my arm instead, and informed me she'd be sitting near the kitchen, where the food stayed warmest. And that was that. A standing reservation. Born on the spot. She never once told the story to the room. She just appeared every year like an auditor. And on her way out she'd pat my hand and say the same thing better than last year. Keep going. We started printing name cards, after an elderly man froze in the doorway. That first Towers year, asking the greeter if he was really allowed in. A name card fixes that instantly. Your name printed waiting for you before you even arrive. Nobody has to wonder. Nobody has to ask. My crew thinks the cards are hospitality. They are. They're also the exact opposite of a locked storm door, manufactured in bulk, on purpose, by a woman who once counted 7 of them through a window. 2. By year 7 we had a waiting list, a rented piano, and a decision to make about press. Priya flew out that October to see the operation and eat her weight in warehouse snacks. She toured the building, admired the framed plate with her jaw set, and then, over takeout at my kitchen counter, went quiet in a way that had furniture in it. You said someday? She said. I think it's someday. She slid her phone across the counter. On the screen was the family group chat. The real one. The one I'd never been added to, screenshotted years earlier, and carried around by my cousin like a stone in her shoe. Timestamp at 7:14 p.m. Christmas Eve, 6 years back, while I was stripping bed 14 at the inn. Renee, she's coming straight from the shift in uniform. Renee, just leave her plate on the steps, she'll get it. My mother, fine. I'm not dealing with the crying either. 2 thumbs up under it. My aunt, and a cousin I used to babysit. That was the whole crime scene, 4 inches tall on a phone screen. My sister had drawn up the porch like a work order, and my mother had signed off on it, and 2 people I'd have driven through snow for had approved it with a cartoon thumb. I read it maybe 10 times. It's fine, I told Priya. And weirdly, it mostly was. You can't be newly wounded by an old scar, you can only finally see its shape. But one thing was missing from that screenshot, and it itched. Who else was in the chat? I asked. Ooh actually wrote the note and carried the plate out. Priya looked down at her food. My unflappable cousin, keeper of every receipt, gave me the first evasive sentence I'd ever heard from her. That's not mine to hand you. 2 nights after she flew home, I did the thing I'd sworn I'd never do. I drove the 50 minutes to Millbrook after close. No good reason on board. And parked under the same bare oak at the end of the street. Headlights off, like a woman in a film about bad decisions. The house needed paint. The porch light burned the same yellow it always had, shining down on the top step, like a little stage waiting for its next act. I watched a shape that was probably my mother cross the kitchen window twice. And a shape that was definitely my father settle into a recliner with the game on. Ordinary people in an ordinary house who had once done something extraordinary to their own daughter, with card stock and a deadbolt. My hand found the door handle. I want to be honest about that. 6 years of building, and 1 screenshot had me parked in the dark composing speeches. I could knock, set the plate flat on their coffee table, and watch their faces do the arithmetic. It would have felt incredible for 90 seconds. And then my mother would have a new story for the salon about the daughter who showed up raving in the night, and I'd have traded 6 years of peace for a minute and a half of theater. Some doors you don't knock on twice. I took my hand off the handle and made the only decision that's ever really held. I would not burn their house down. And I would not hold the bucket when it burned on its own. No revenge. No rescue. I drove the 50 minutes home and slept like a paid invoice. 2. That fall, Clearline crossed 100 employees, and the regional chamber named us Small Business of the Year. I found out by email and had to shut my office door, because the custodian's granddaughter had just been named Businesswoman of Anything. And that's a lot to arrange your face around in front of people. I sent Marisol up to accept it. She ran our entire medical division and had earned it outright. And I sat in the 3rd row and clapped until my hands hurt. A photographer for the Ledger caught me mid-clap anyway, looking like I'd swallowed the sun. That photo is how Amanda Osei, the Ledger's features writer, finally connected the dots. The anonymous-ish founder. The warehouse dinner that had fed over 100 people the year before. The company with a framed paper plate behind the founder's desk. She called the next morning with the polite relentlessness of a good reporter and made her case. The profile should run on Christmas Eve morning. Founder's name, founder's face, the plate, the whole story. Everything in me that still lived above that laundromat wanted to say no. Anonymous was armor. Anonymous meant Millbrook stayed a weather report and never became weather. But I'd just watched Marisol hold a crystal award in front of 600 people, because I was too guarded to walk a stage myself. And there were 280 chairs on order for the long table. And somewhere out there was a 26-year-old eating a holiday dinner alone in a parked car, who needed to know how this story goes. Run it? I told her. 1 condition. The handwriting on the plate stays out of it. There's a question about it even I can't answer yet. She agreed. Neither of us knew the answer was already driving toward me. 2 weeks before Christmas Eve, my procurement manager forwarded me a vendor bid with a note. This one's laying it on thick. We were sourcing catering for the long table. 280 covers, real volume, real money, and suppliers had come courting. I opened the attachment and the room went very still. Aldermont Event Supply. Millbrook, Rhode Island. Marcus Boone, owner. My brother-in-law's letterhead, my brother-in-law's signature. And a cover letter buttered on both sides. Clearline's community leadership. An honor to be considered. And a closing line typed by a man who had no idea what he was typing. It would be a privilege to serve your table, D. Kessler. I read it 3 times. He didn't know. The bid had gone out addressed to D. Kessler the way you'd address a stranger, because that's exactly what I was to him. A set of initials on a building he wanted inside of. Renee handled Aldermont's paperwork. Priya had told me, but this one had gone out under Marcus's own hand, through some vendor portal. One of dozens of long-shot bids from a company that a single search told me needed the business badly. My brother-in-law was begging for a seat at my table, and had no idea whose table it was. For 6 years, Millbrook had been a place that happened to me. Now it was mailing me proposals. Here's what mattered from that afternoon forward. I knew exactly who they were. They had no idea who I was. Knowledge like that is a loaded thing, and you have to carry it carefully. The clock mattered too. The ledger profile would publish Christmas Eve morning. The long table would seat 280 at noon that same day. The vendor decision was due before either. Whatever was about to happen between my family and me now had a date, an hour, and an address. I want to be precise about what I did next. I didn't reject my brother-in-law's bid because he was my brother-in-law. I ran Aldermont through the exact same review as the other 4 bidders, because Clearline chooses vendors the way clinics choose us. On paper, on record, on references, it wasn't close. 2 supplier judgments on the county docket. A food safety citation from the spring, corrected late. Reviews from school. District clients describing shorted orders and swapped brands. A wage claim from a former driver, settled, and a second one pending. That last item ended it twice over. You know by now how I feel about people who don't pay the ones who carry things. I called Priya that night for the ground truth, and she gave it to me plainly. Marcus has been robbing the payroll schedule to cover interest. Renee's telling everyone they're expanding. Your mother's telling the whole congregation they're doing wonderfully. Then she paused. There's something else in the paper this week. She texted me a photo of the legal notices. The gray column nobody reads until their own name shows up in it. Third listing down a pre-foreclosure filing on Aldergate Road. My parents' house. The house with the porch. 90 days from a sheriff's sale. Wedged between a storage unit auction and somebody's dissolved LLC, right under the church bake sale ad. I looked at that gray square of newsprint a long time. I don't do revenge. I do due diligence. But I'd be lying if I told you the diligence didn't come back with a verdict bigger than a catering contract. Because suddenly a lot about this particular December, and about phones that were about to start ringing, made a very specific kind of sense. Priya filled in the arithmetic of 6 years, and it was simple and brutal. When my envelopes stopped, my parents refinanced. When the refinance reset, my father's back forced the early retirement the pension couldn't stretch to cover. They'd borrowed against the house again, quietly. The way my mother did everything shameful, while telling the salon they were doing wonderfully. Interest compounds faster than appearances. 6 years after the porch. The bank had run out of patience the same week the town found out who I was, because banks publish what families won't. And here's the part I had to sit with. None of them had ever connected the good years to me. The years the mortgage never missed a payment. That was just the world working as it should. The collapse that followed my exile wasn't evidence of what I'd been quietly holding up. In the story where my mother did the telling, it was proof I'd always been a drain. You cannot audit a family that keeps books like that. I was reaching for the phone to call my attorney, not for them, for me, to make sure my name wasn't on a single signature line of that mess. When the office buzzer went off and knocked the thought clean out of my head, front desk. A delivery. Flowers of all things. A bouquet of grocery store chrysanthemums in autumn colors, addressed to me at Clearline. 10 days before the profile that would tell the world who Clearline actually was. No name on the card. Just one line in a careful, slanted hand. Proud of you. I stood in the lobby holding $60 of mums like a live grenade. Nobody outside the company and Priya knew my name was on this building. The handwriting slanted like my father's. But I'd been wrong about handwriting once already. I set the card in my desk drawer, on top of the manila envelope where the unanswered questions live. The vendor decision went out on a Tuesday. We chose Hollis Brothers Food Service, clean record, union drivers, a bid 8%, higher than Aldermont's and worth, every point of it. Every losing bidder gets a standard regrets letter from procurement. Marcus's file deserved exactly that and nothing more. Instead, I wrote it myself. Professional, factual. 3 short paragraphs on selection criteria. The labor, record review, the door left open pending resolution of the pending wage claim. Nothing personal anywhere in it, except the signature blocked. For 6 years I'd signed everything leaving this company, as D. Kessler, a habit I told myself was branding, and knew perfectly well was a hiding place. I looked at the letter a long moment, then typed my whole name for the first time in company correspondence. Dana Kessler, founder and CEO, Clearline Facilities. My whole name, going back to Millbrook at last, on a rejection letter. There are cleaner forms of honesty. I've never found one more satisfying to sign. I hit send at 4. It bounced at 4:02. Marcus's inbox was full. A detail that told you everything about the state of Aldermont event supply. And my assistant dutifully resent it to the company's general contact address listed on the bid. I didn't think anything of it. Why would I? A general inbox is a general inbox. It wasn't until Priya's goodnight text that the shape of it landed. She asked how the vendor decision had gone, and I told her, and she went quiet, then sent one line that sat me straight up in bed. Dana. The general inbox is Renee's. Somewhere in Millbrook, sitting unread in my sister's queue, was a letter with my full legal name signed at the bottom. The fuse was lit. Nobody had noticed yet. The Tuesday before Christmas Eve. A Providence News crew came to shoot B, roll of the long table set up for the evening broadcast. I'd agreed to background footage only, steam trays, volunteers, Terrence directing table placement like a ground operation, and I stayed behind the camera line with a clipboard, where founders belong. But television crews make a living finding the person everyone else keeps glancing toward. While I was walking Marisol through the seating chart for the senior buses, the camera drifted. That evening at 6:11, 5 seconds of my face went out across central Rhode Island under a banner reading for UNDR. Dan and Kessler says no. Oani itso en papier pietedes at rtble. 5 seconds. After 6 years, that's all it took. 50 minutes south, in a waiting room I'd only learn about later through Priya. My sister was scrolling her phone while her daughter, Nadia, 13 now, had her ankle looked at after a volleyball tournament. The waiting room television was tuned to the 6 o'clock news. Nadia told it better than any reporter could have. Mom stopped talking in the middle of a word. Nadia said. She just stood up and walked to the TV and stood there. A nurse told her to sit down and she didn't. My sister stood under a mounted television in a pediatric clinic, staring up at my face like it was a lottery number she'd once thrown away. Then she lifted her phone and photographed the screen. Nadia said she could hear her mother's breathing change. The ankle, for the record, was only a mild sprain. Nothing else in that waiting room walked out unbroken. Renee didn't say a word on the drive home. Nadia said she was typing the whole time. At red lights, at stop signs, typing. What my sister typed landed in the family group chat at 7:40 that night, and Priya, still in it after all these years, silent as furniture, sent me the screenshots in real time. I watched my own resurrection like a live broadcast. First, the photo of the TV, my face half pixelated under the chyron, Then, in capitals GUS, Lo Gabicho IFUND. Then 3 messages stacked like falling dominoes. She owns Clearline, that huge cleaning company. The long table thing on the news is hers. Then nothing for 9 full minutes. By the standards of that group chat, 9 minutes of silence was an earthquake. My aunt broke first, with all the eloquence the moment deserved. A single question mark. Then my mother, and I want you to appreciate that after 6 years, this was her opening statement, screenshot preserved for all time, is that OUR Dana? R. Possessive first person plural. From the woman who wrote the check that told me exactly what I was worth. Then the messages bloomed all at once, everyone typing over everyone. Has anyone kept her number? Someone find her address. Is she married? Does she know about the house? Don't mention the house right away. That last one from Renee, strategy in writing, 11 minutes in. I set the phone face down on the counter and stood in my kitchen listening to the refrigerator hum, feeling the front edge of the thing I'd been too busy to imagine for 6 years finally arrive. They were coming. All of them, in whatever order the phone company allowed. The screen lit up. Unknown number, Millbrook area code. I didn't answer. I was in the warehouse until 10 that night doing the final count on 280 rented place settings. China, water glasses, forks heavy enough to mean it. And I had a decision to make about my phone. So I made the same decision I'd made on that porch 6 years earlier. Just pointed the other direction. I turned it face down on a shipping crate and kept counting plates. It rang while I counted. It rang while Terrence and I taped floor plans to the loading dock wall. It rang in my coat pocket on the drive home, like a trapped bird, and I let it. At midnight in my kitchen, I finally turned it over. 91 missed calls, from 13 different numbers, in a little over an hour of actual ringing. My mother's cell. The Aldergate landline I still knew by heart. Renee, Marcus, my aunt. Numbers with no names attached that the internet swore were cousins. 91 calls from people who, for 6 years, had known exactly how to reach me and used none of it. My voicemail filled early, and I only played the first one, because you should always read the cover letter. My mother's voice came out syrup, warm, pitched up half an octave into her church register. A voice I hadn't heard aimed at me since before I owned a uniform. Sweetheart, it's Mom. We saw you on the news, honey. We are so proud. We've been looking for you everywhere. Call your mother back. Looking for me everywhere. I'd lived 50 minutes down the highway, with my name in the state business registry the whole time. I stood at my counter and laughed once. The way you laugh at a bill you'd already budgeted for. Then I deleted the voicemail, plugged in my phone, and went to bed. Not clean enough for the table, but clean enough to call 91 times. The first night my name showed up next to money, sleep came easy. It always does when the receipts finally start arriving on their own. Wednesday morning, while I signed for 18 turkeys. My sister finally cleared the Aldermont inbox, and Priya's report arrived by noon, pieced together from Nadia and from Renee's own furious retelling, at my aunt's kitchen table. Renee had gone into that inbox hunting for a lifeline. Any vendor, any yes, and found instead a regrets letter dated before the newscast. Declining her husband's bid on grounds of compliance and labor history, signed in full Dana Kessler, founder and CEO. Think about the order of those blows. Not just rejected by the little sister, in writing on the merits, before the family even knew she was alive. Which was somehow the cruelest version of all. Because it meant I hadn't spent 6 years plotting against them. I'd simply held them to the same standard as strangers, and they'd failed it fair and square. Nadia said her mother read the letter out loud twice, and the second reading stopped in the middle, and the kitchen went, in Nadia's words, weird quiet. Then Renee did what Renee always does. Converted humiliation into a plan before lunch. If phone calls weren't being answered, and bids weren't being accepted, fine. Christmas Eve was tomorrow. The news had said exactly where 280 people would be eating at noon. You cannot decline family standing in front of you. She said that at my aunt's table, apparently, like a general briefing an invasion. And my mother added the touch that still takes my breath away. We'll bring a pie, she said, Opal's recipe. The pumpkin, my grandmother's pie? Carried as a passport into a room run by the granddaughter, she raised to know exactly what that recipe was worth. 2. Wednesday afternoon. The family sent a scout. I was signing off on a produced delivery at the dock when Marisol radioed that a woman up front was asking for the owner. No appointment, wouldn't give a name, said she was family. I knew before I rounded the corner. My Aunt Dolores, the one whose thumb had approved the porch 6 years earlier, stood in my lobby in her good wool coat, holding her purse with both hands like she'd brought a casserole. Dana Marie, she said, warm as a heating pad. Look at all this. Look at you. 6 years, and the first relative to reach me in person opened with the decorating. She'd clearly been elected. Sent up the highway to soften the ground, establish contact, report back on the terrain. She tried the weather, then my health, and then, with the subtlety of a dump truck, arrived at her actual cargo. Your parents are going through something just awful with the house, sweetheart. And Christmas Eve would mean the world. Family is family at the end of the day. I let her finish. Then I did the thing I'd promised myself I'd do, sitting under that bare oak. And it turns out a boundary spoken at conversation volume is the loudest thing you can install in a lobby. I'm glad you came, Aunt Dolores, I said, and handed her a flyer from the front desk. Doors open at noon tomorrow. Everyone gets a chair, and everyone's welcome. That includes all of you. But there's no private meeting before it, and there's no conversation about the house. Ever. She blinked at the flyer, then at me, hunting for the crack that used to be there. Family is family, she tried again, quieter. Yes, ma'am, I said. That's why the flyer says everyone. She left with it in her purse. By supper time, Priya reported the group chat had its marching orders and its menu assignment. The pie was already cooling. Wednesday night I walked the empty warehouse alone, the way I used to walk motel corridors on final inspection. 280 chairs squared. 280 settings laid. At every place, a small white card with a guest's name. So nobody would ever have to stand in a doorway wondering if they belonged. I straightened cards for an hour, and if you think I didn't feel the full weight of that cardstock. Once a wall, now an invitation. You haven't been listening. Priya called at 9 and skipped hello. They're coming tomorrow. All of them. Your mother, your father, Renee, Marcus, Nadia. They're bringing a pie. Dana. They're planning to make it a reunion in front of your cameras. I stood in the center of my long, bright, empty room and looked down the line of tables. The silence on my end went on so long she said my name twice. Then set 3 more chairs, I said. She asked if that meant I was forgiving them. No, I said. It means nobody stands in my doorway holding a pie, while 280 people watch. Whatever happens tomorrow happens with everyone seated and fed. Even them. That's the whole difference I've spent 6 years building. Tomorrow it holds. Or it doesn't. Amanda's profile was already set to run at 6 the next morning. The story of the paper plate would belong to everyone. The Ledger ran the profile at 6 a.m. On Christmas Eve, front of the feature section, headline chosen the way a locksmith chooses a pick. The founder who frames a paper plate. The photo underneath was exactly what I'd asked for. Not my face first, but the wall behind my desk. The soft, edged plate with Dana fading in marker, the brass plaque reading reserved seating, and me beside it, arms crossed, not smiling and not sorry. The story told it straight. The porch, the locked door, the text message, the 6 years, the company, the rule about real plates. She never named my family. She didn't need to. Millbrook is a town of 8,000 people, with one newspaper rack outside the salon, and by 8 a.m., Priya reported you could track the story moving through town, by whose porch lights came on early. By 11, the warehouse was everything I'd built it to be. Steam and cider, and somebody's kid, working through carols on an upright piano. We'd rolled in from Terrence's church. Senior buses unloading at the dock. Marisol's team walking people to their named seats. Mrs. Ferris? Yes, that Mrs. Ferris. 82 now. Installed at the head table with her new terrier at her feet. 280 chairs filling. I was carrying a tray of rolls. Because at my table the owner carries things. When the noise changed, it started at the door and moved inward. Conversation dropping row by row. 280 people noticing something one table at a time. I set the tray down and turned around. There they were, framed in my loading dock doorway with the December light behind them. My mother in her good church coat. My father with his hat in his hands. Renee, Marcus, Nadia, and a pumpkin pie held out in front of them like a flag of truce. My mother didn't walk to me. My mother made an entrance, and every woman in that room past 50 knew the difference on sight. She came up the center aisle between the long tables with her arms opening wider with every step. Voice pitched to carry, full church register. My baby. There you are, we found you. She was crying before she reached me. Real tears. I'll grant her that. My mother has always been able to cry on schedule the way some people can whistle. Behind her, Renee had her phone up in horizontal, already filming, narrating softly like a nature documentary. Marcus peeled off toward the sponsor tables the moment he cleared the door, shaking hands, passing cards, working my room like a trade show floor. Nadia hung back by the coat rack, 13 and mortified. And my heart went out to that kid. Before anything else happened. Because she alone had walked in with clean hands. My mother arrived in front of me and held the pie up between us. Opal's pumpkin, she announced, to the room, to the cameras, to the story she was already writing in real time. Your grandmother's recipe, honey. I made it for our fresh start. 280 people watched me look at that pie. Then a chair scraped, unhurried. Off to my right at the head table, and Mrs. Ferris pulled herself to her feet with her cane, taking her time about it, and said, in the clear carrying voice of a woman who'd taught Sunday school for 40 years, and buried every fear she ever owned. I remember you, Vivian. I remember a plate on a porch. I was there. The room didn't gasp. It did something worse. It went perfectly. Attentively quiet. 280 people leaning in at once, watching my mother's smile stay exactly where it was while everything behind it packed a suitcase. A misunderstanding, my mother said, wheeling toward Mrs. Ferris, pie still raised. That whole story got twisted years ago. It was a difficult day. Food was kept warm for her. This town does love a tale. She was good. She'd had 6 years of rehearsal at the salon. But I'd stopped listening. Because I'd already turned and lifted the frame off my office wall. I'd moved it to the serving station that morning, which maybe tells you I'd known all along how this day would go. I set it down flat on the head table, glass up, in front of all of them. The plate, DNA, big round capitals, the long looping tail on the D. My mother glanced at it and away fast, like it was the sun. But my father, who hadn't spoken since the doorway, hat still in his hands, looked down at that handwriting and could not stop looking. His shoulders came down off their hooks. I'd carried the question for 6 years, and standing there, I finally understood I'd always been afraid of exactly this answer. Dad, I said quietly, just for our little circle, though the room was so still it hardly mattered. The plate was Mom's idea. You just watched. Right? Renee, mid-livestream, actually laughed. The short scoffing laugh of a woman correcting a detail before she can stop herself. Dad wrote it? She said. Mom told him to put it out and he... And then she heard her own voice land, in 280 ears, and stopped. My father's hands tightened on the brim of his hat. When he finally spoke, it came out sanded down to almost nothing. Your mother said if I let you in smelling like that, she'd never forgive me. I thought. He looked up at me, eyes wet and old. I thought if I wrote it nice, at least you'd know somebody out there was being gentle about it. It was all I could think to do. I wrote it nice. I want to tell you I had a speech ready. I didn't. What I had was 6 years of practice. At not raising my voice in rooms where I held the power. Because that's what running a company teaches you if you let it. So when I finally spoke, it came out at the volume you'd use to read a bedtime story. And 280 people held their breath to hear it. Which is a kind of loud my mother has never once achieved by shouting. You taught me exactly what a seat at your table costs, Mom, I said. It costs everything you are. I stopped paying 6 years ago. She opened her mouth. I kept going, still quiet, still even, laying it out like a walkthrough checklist. The double shift because Priya quit and someone had to strip 11 rooms. The text sent at 11:04, seen instantly, never answered. The locked storm door. The 7 place cards on a table that had been told I was coming. And then the line nobody in Millbrook had ever heard. Not even in Amanda's article, because some documents you keep in a frame, and some you keep somewhere deeper. You can eat out there. You're not fit to sit with company tonight. And the last item. The gas money. 3 years of it, first of every month, into your hand. It carried that second mortgage. And you know it. And the bank knows it, and now the whole town can read the legal notices, and do the math themselves. I didn't accuse. I didn't plead. I inventoried. Around us, I could hear the room doing what rooms do when the truth gets laid out calmly, nodding, murmuring, turning toward my mother, with the particular stillness of a jury that has stopped deliberating. The church register broke first, then the mask underneath it. My mother slammed the pie down on the head table, hard enough to crack the dish, and 30 years of managed appearances came off her like shingles in a windstorm. After everything I sacrificed, she screamed, actually screamed, in the acoustic sweet spot of my own warehouse. You owe this family, you ungrateful, hateful girl. We gave you everything. And then she swept her arm at the room, at my tables, my china, my 280 guests, and delivered the line she must have been saving her whole life. The one she thought was an arrow and handed me, instead like a crown. You think these people respect you? Look at you. You scrubbed their toilets. The silence after that had a texture to it, and into it came a sound I will hear on my deathbed and smile. Chairs one after another, pushing back unhurried all around the room. My crew. Marisol standing. Terrence standing at attention like the flag was passing. Malik. The whole overnight medical division, still in their good clothes. 130 people who scrub toilets, rising to their feet around 280 guests, not saying a word. Just standing. The way you stand for something. My mother turned in a slow circle inside that forest of standing cleaners. And for the first time in her life, I watched her fail to find a single face that was buying it. So I gave her the last line she'd ever get from me, at full volume. Except I never once raised my voice. I looked at my sister, phone still up, still filming, God bless her, and said gently, the sentence she'd written 6 years earlier, while I was stripping bed 14. Just leave her plate on the steps. She'll get the hint. Renee went the color of my china. Where did you? She started, from the corner, and Preya stood up beside me. I kept the screenshots, Ren. I said. All of them. Here's how it settled. Right there in the room. Each of them handed back exactly what they'd brought. My mother got the audience. 30 years, spent curating what Millbrook believed about the Kesslers, and in 4 minutes of footage, her own daughters, plus 200 phones besides, she recast herself for good. No editor, no retake. Nobody took anything from her. She stood in a warehouse she'd have bragged about, if it belonged to Renee, and burned her one asset, her image. In front of the town she'd built it for. By Monday, Priya told me, the pastor's wife had asked her to step back from the welcome committee for a season. Churches can say forever so gently. Renee got the internet. The video she'd shot to star in went up, before she'd even left my parking lot. Uploaded by someone else who'd caught the wide angle, and Millbrook's own comment sections did the rest once the screenshots surfaced beside it. Leave her plate on the steps. She'll get the hint. Her own sentence. Her own handwriting on the whole affair. 6 years delayed. Attached to her name in every share. Marcus got arithmetic. In front of the sponsor tables he'd been working all morning. He tried one last angle. Surely, family, a second look at the contract. And I gave him the whole ruling in 3 sentences, at conversation volume, with witnesses. The bid was reviewed on its merits. It didn't pass. Family doesn't change the math. Watching a salesman absorb a no with an audience is its own kind of tuition. And my father got the hardest sentence in the room, which was mercy. You can stay and eat, Dad, I said. Everyone eats here. That's the difference between my table and yours. He didn't move for a long moment. Then Glenn Kessler took off his coat, sat down at the nearest open place card, tucked his hat under his chair like a man in church, and stayed. My mother left the way storms leave, loudly. All at once, out through the dock doors, cracked pie dish abandoned on the table. Renee filmed a few more seconds reflexively. Before she understood, there was no version of that footage that saved her, pocketed her phone, and pulled Marcus off the sponsor row by his sleeve. The room let them go without a sound, which was somehow more final than booing. And then there was Nadia, 13, stranded by the coat rack between her sprinting family and 280 strangers, red-eyed, holding her own elbows. The whole aisle of my life narrowed down to that kid. I know exactly what it does to a person. Being the one left standing on a threshold, while the adults decide what she's worth. I crossed the room to her, and just as I reached her, the volunteer coordinator's microphone popped on overhead, cheerful and oblivious, announcing that dinner was served and the pie table was open. The room began to move and rumble around us. I put my hand out to my niece the way you'd offer it, to something wild and gentle at once. Set with me? I asked. She looked at the dock doors her mother had gone through. She looked back at me. Okay, she said, in the smallest voice, and then, testing it, Aunt Dana. 6 years, and somebody in that family had finally said my name right. 2. Dinner went on. Because dinner is what the whole thing was always about. 280 people ate off real china, at one impossibly long table. My father passed the rolls, when they came to him, and thanked every volunteer and cleared his whole plate like a man doing penance, by casserole. Nadia sat on my right, worked through 2 kinds of pie, and asked 17 questions about how a cleaning company actually runs. The framed plate lay flat at the head of the table, all afternoon, where anyone could read it, and people did. Walking past on the way to seconds. Touching the table edge beside it like a memorial, which I suppose it was. Something ended there and got buried decently. When the piano kid found the first notes of something slow and grateful, I looked down the full length of my table and let it land reserved seating for everyone who had ever eaten alone. The week after, the calls kept coming, and how you spend that week is the whole test. I blocked the old numbers and the 30 new ones that bloomed to replace them. Cousins I'd never met discovering deep wells of affection. My aunt's number cycling through 3 different phones like a bill collector. My mother's final voicemail, before I blocked her, ran 4 minutes. Tears turning at the 2-minute mark, precisely on cue, into what the family really needed me to understand about the house. I deleted it at minute 2 and change. The house went the way filed paperwork goes. I didn't catch it. And I won't pretend the porch didn't cross my mind when I read the auction date. My parents moved into a 2-bedroom apartment over on Cranston Street. As for the flowers, the grocery store mums. The slanted careful hand. I finally set the card next to the framed plate and knew for certain what I'd have known already, if I'd let myself. Same hand, both times. The man wrote what he couldn't say, once in shame, once in something better, and mailed it into the silence, hoping. I haven't answered my father yet. But the card is still in my desk, and his December thank you note sits beside it. And I notice I keep not throwing them away, which is its own kind of answer. Renee sent exactly one text, from a number I hadn't blocked yet. You've made your point. That was it. No apology inside it anywhere. Just a referee's whistle from a woman who'd run out of game. I didn't reply. Some silences are answers. She taught me that herself, one Christmas Eve, through a locked storm door. What I did instead was paperwork of my own. My attorney drew up an education trust in Nadia's name. Hers alone, untouchable by any adult in Millbrook, unlockable at 18, funded quietly. No announcement, no leverage for anyone. Nadia herself takes the bus in most Saturdays now. Badge and all. Youngest volunteer on the long table roster. Entirely her own idea and the best hire I never made. Priya runs our community programs, full-time as of this January. The screenshots are retired. The receipts are all cleared. Here's the one thing I know now that I didn't know sitting in that car, with a warm plate balanced on the steering wheel. Family isn't the people who share your name. It's the people who make sure you never eat alone. And the cleanest thing I ever did was walk away from a table that only had room for my shame. That's my story. One paper plate. 91 calls. A table with 280 chairs. If someone ever made you eat outside, in any sense of the word, go build your own table, and build it long.